probably the most intriguing part of these songs of the South is the longer poem, Encountering Sorrow. Not just for its length, I would say, is it more intriguing, but for its poetic and philosophical and materialist aspirations. The poem charts a particularly troubled society, I would say, and voiced through a couple of different people, uh, of a narrative of journey and dismay brought on by political corruption. Political corruption is souring the land. You get a sense, and those who resist it have to withdraw from that society and go seek virtue somewhere else. And the issues around that are really pretty colorfully, let's say, brought out. The poetic protagonist, and this identity tends to shift a little over time. The narrative voice is never really certain. Complains of some of the more recent former leaders that have been leading this political organization, saying King Key had 9 stanzas and the 9 songs, extreme and wild pleasures, he did as he pleased. He was heedless of troubles, made no plans for the morrow, whereby the 5 sons brought strife to his house. He is somewhat outraged at some of the lack of virtue that he sees in imperial China of the time. He does, however, single out some worthy ancients from the more distant past as comparisons. You, the mighty, was stern, respectful, and godly. The right was Zhao's norm. It thus did not err. They raised men of worth, rewarded the able, and kept the straight line. They did not veer. The comparison of the ancients is significant because throughout Chinese culture there is a sense of there is a predominant, I would say, culture of ancestor worship that spans the culture. So when you were appealing to the far distant past, that is like appealing to a higher order of example, a greater generation, let's say, than the current fallen. And you have to understand that the voice that's coming out here is a representative of, let's say, a political opposition. The in China of the time, the North is associated with the imperialist dynasty of the Zhao, and the imperialist aims to basically run the entire area. And the more regional, I would say, perhaps more conservative in a way, southern portion of the territory was resisting that. It's not a difficult sociological dynamic to read. So the voice that's coming through of the somewhat troubled aristocrat, the troubled aristocrat who is upset, dismayed at the political corruption. He is the voice of some concern that this corrupt North is imposing its corruption and its political culture in general on the South, and that's got him very concerned, obviously. The poem does assert a central core of reality, claiming sovereign heaven is slanted in favor of none. It discerns a man's virtues, puts helpers beside him. When wisdom and sense do deeds that are splendid, they may then act their will in this land down below. So this is a sense of the divine realm, the gods, being somewhat at a remove. They are leaving it up to mankind. Humanity ultimately is responsible for the culture it creates and the practice of virtue. The gods won't necessarily intercede. The protagonist, which may have shifted identity at this point, then has a kind of out of body experience, observing his physical self from a spiritual perspective, perhaps a so called astral projection from shamanistic culture, where the soul leaves the body of sorts and can observe himself in or his material essence, or travel around at some freedom of physical restraint. But he says, "By the brink stands my body. I am in death's peril. I discern my first nature and still regret not." He has come to a moment of crisis, a moment of peril, perhaps in opposing political corruption in any time of the powerful is a dicey proposition. Opposing anything in the powerful is a dicey proposition. But the experience or the decision, that moment of crisis, forges in him it launches him into a mission. It launches him into a kind of odyssey, to an odyssey of discovery, a quest for inspiration and virtue, and it comes out of that sense of moral and spiritual vulnerability, where he feels like everything that he values is being compromised, and so he needs to go and try and find a place or find an example of those values where they are validated. He needs to escape. He writes, "I knelt with robes open, thus stating my case, having grasped so clearly what is central and right. I teamed jade white dragons, rode the bird that hides sky, waiting on winds to fleetly fare upward. I bade my phoenixes mount up in flight to continue their going, both by day and by night. Then the whirlwind's mass drawing together, the marshaled cloud rainbows came to withstand me. A bewildering tumult, first apart, then agreeing. Then they streamed flashing colors, high and then low. I bade God's gatekeeper open the bar. He stood blocking gateway and stared at me." Which is interesting, because from the first of his journey, nature, the natural world, and the spirit world, God, seem to be standing in opposition. Perhaps this is an example of humanity having to be responsible for its virtue. You cannot rely on anything outside your own capacity for virtue. It's a lesson in responsibility in that sense. But he is seeking his kind of spiritual essence. He's notably at one point is seeking a shadowy female figure, perhaps a feminine spirit in contrast to the materialist society or culture of men. I'm not entirely certain. It is very, very ambiguous. But he keeps looking around the country. He does persist, and he goes out on this journey, and he's looking for spirits of virtue, looking for ancestors, looking for heroes of his own, of the past, who exemplified good leadership. They sometimes get represented as he's traveling around. These images of what he is seeing and experiencing, sometimes come out in symbols, and they can be a little bit hard to read. The recurrent images or essences, experiences, I don't know, of smell, the smell of grasses, the smell of flowers, of particular flowers that grow primarily in the South. These are usually expressive of a kind of political virtue. The redolence of nature has an association with political virtue. Um, the poetry in all of that is often very lush. It is sweeping. It is romantic. It is celebrating movement and beauty and sensation and a vibrancy that is often almost ecstatic in that, again, shamanistic anti-materialist realm. Yet the journey ultimately delivers the protagonist to a kind of stillness, a state of oneness, you might say, a state of emptiness in another philosophical tradition, but also a kind of hermit-like repose, where he's disdaining now the corrupt society behind him. For me have been hitched those dragons that fly, mixed onyx and ivory serve as my coach. How can a mind set apart be ever like others? I will go far, I will go away far, keep myself removed. I bent my way round at Kunlun Mountain, long and far was the road. There I ranged widely. I raised my cloud rainbows, dimming and darkening, jade phoenix chimes rang with a jingling voice. At dawn I loosed the wheel block at ford of the sky. By twilight I came to the ends of the west. Phoenix spread its wings and bore up my banners. High aloft it soared. Its wing beats were steady. He has removed himself. He has stepped back from society. He has found a kind of spiritualism, a kind of spiritual fulfillment, if you will, outside the realms of the social and political order. The contrast between the concern for moral government that is so motivating throughout this. That is ultimately the primary concern, the concern for virtue, but specifically virtue in government, is very Confucian. It's an example of that Confucian behaviorism that you see in the Analects and the and also the classic poetry. But this is set side by side with that kind of shamanistic spiritualism. The southern regions are asserting their own perspective, their own value system, side by side, let's say, with that with the good government of Confucianism, and it's uncertain exactly where we're falling in that. Certainly, this paints a portrait of a culture in some uncertainty, a culture struggling for its own identity, for its own character as the civilization expands. The poetic protagonist rejects the moral corruption and ethical lassitude, let's say, that he sees in fellow members of the ruling class. The author Ku Yuan was generally is generally respected as a representation of a kind of ethics and virtue and integrity of self-sacrifice. The actual authorship is always a little bit of a point of concern, and we don't need to dwell on it. But the notion of here is a personality that is uh, asserting a particular identity, a particular cultural and political identity in the face of a larger swamping of that identity, let's say. The form of the poem is often quite extraordinary. The the style itself is notably difficult. The narrative can be kind of choppy. We're never quite sure who is speaking at any one time. The identity of the protagonist might be shifting. The symbolism is often quite obscure. These make it difficult for any reader, particularly Western readers, to come to. But you got to ask why. You gotta speculate as to, well, what is this poem really trying to do? What audience is this poem really speaking to? And the curiosity, the ambiguity, speaks, I would say, to a kind of prescripted and limited readership, where he is speaking in a language that people of the South perhaps would understand. The penultimate stanza: I was mounting aloft to such dazzling splendor, all at once I glanced down to my homeland of old. My driver grew sad, my horses felt care. They flexed looking backward and would not go on. Now, I'm not sure exactly where they're going with that, but I think maybe some people in that southern region might. In the end, the poetic protagonist rejects the world of political corruption. He renounces earthly attachment and strives for a more spiritualist life, far removed from society. This is possibly a rejection of Confucianism itself. The questions are just uncertain at this point. The last stanza, the so-called ending song, has him still concerned with this conflict of making good rule and trying to live in the world with maintaining his own virtue, his own sense of right and wrong. And curiously, the final line, the final thought or question that he leaves is ambiguous, because the poem identifies that he will go off to seek where Peng and Zhan dwell. Peng and Zhan. The little footnote down at the bottom tells us that, well, there's a concern about this. Now, Peng and Zhan might refer to two individuals of kind of legendary status. They're two shamans, essentially. So seeking them would be a reference to pursuing a kind of spiritualist truth, perhaps associated more with the South. But it could also refer to Peng and Zhan, to a single individual named Peng Zhan, who was a noted and highly respected government bureaucrat of the more distant past. So there you have those two examples, those two choices laid out for you. You can be the spiritualist, or you can be the Confucian materialist. And the poem does not resolve that. The poem does not provide the answer. You have no idea what is really going on at the end there. At least I don't. Maybe other people do. It's a question. It's an ambiguity. It is a prompt, if you will. It's an opportunity for readers to step in as representatives of humanity and take responsibility for executing their own understanding of virtue.